If you've lived in Kentucky long enough, you've probably been closer to towns that no longer exist than you realize. Across the state are places where entire communities once lived, worked, and raised families before something caused them to disappear. Today, most people don't even know they were ever there. These are 12 Kentucky ghost towns you were never meant to find. Number 12. Birmingham, Marshall County. There is a ghost town at the bottom of Kentucky Lake, and on certain days, when the water level drops, you can see it come back. Birmingham sat on the Tennessee River in Marshall County, named after the great English industrial city by founders who dreamed of building a Kentucky iron empire. Those dreams came close. A stave mill employed over 200 people. At its peak, Birmingham had more than 600 residents, bigger than Benton, the county seat, and 5 churches for those 600 people, which tells you something about how seriously this town took putting down roots. Then, in 1942, TVA told Birmingham it had to go. Kentucky Dam was going in downstream. The Tennessee River was becoming Kentucky Lake, the largest man-made lake in the eastern United States, and Birmingham was in the flood zone. The residents packed up. For reasons historians still haven't fully explained, the town was never completely cleared before the water rose. The dam completed in 1944. The lake filled. Birmingham went under. Boaters and fishermen cross Kentucky Lake constantly today. Most have no idea there's a town beneath them, but when TVA drops the lake level for flood control, sometimes 10 feet or more, Birmingham comes back. Foundations, streets, the shapes of buildings in the silt. People have walked those exposed streets and picked up artifacts from homes that have been underwater for 80 years. Just off Birmingham Point, a cemetery island stays above the surface, even at high water. Old headstones surrounded by the lake, watching over a town that nobody can reach anymore. Number 11. Golden Pond, Trigg County. Golden Pond had already survived 2 devastating fires and rebuilt from nothing both times. The kind of community that doesn't quit easily. It outlasted Prohibition, the Depression, and decades of isolation on a remote peninsula between 2 rivers in western Kentucky. By the 1960s, a few hundred families had farmed and fished this land for generations, doing exactly what their grandparents had done. None of that mattered. President Kennedy needed a recreation area. In 1963, JFK announced land between the lakes, a 170,000-acre federal project transforming the peninsula between Kentucky Lake and Lake Barkley into public wilderness. The plan required removing everyone, 900 families, more than 2,700 people, including the whole community of Golden Pond. TVA used eminent domain to force sales at prices residents called insulting. Some held out for years. According to documented accounts, homes of residents who refused to sell were burned before legal proceedings were completed. The last residents left in 1969. The town was demolished. A highway was cut directly through the old town site. Today, driving US Route 68 through land between the lakes, you'll pass a sign reading Golden Pond, marking a visitor center with a planetarium that sits where the town used to be. Out front, 2 concrete mounting blocks from the old main street still stand. Residents once used them to climb onto their horses. That's all that remains of a community that had rebuilt itself twice from the ground up and couldn't survive the 3rd time. Number 10. Ford's Ferry, Crittenden County. James Ford was everything a frontier community could want. A militia captain, a church-going family man, a plantation owner with a busy ferry operation on the Ohio River, respected in every county he worked in, trusted with civic responsibility. He was also the secret head of one of the most dangerous outlaw gangs in frontier American history. Ford's Ferry Gang operated across the early 1800s along the Ohio River in what is now Crittenden County. Ford ran his legitimate ferry business as cover, using it to identify flatboats and keelboats carrying valuable cargo. When the right vessel came along, his men would strike, take everything aboard, and make sure no one remained to report it. He coordinated with river pirates at Cave-In Rock on the Illinois side. He worked alongside highwaymen who targeted overland travelers. He used his militia officer rank to track law enforcement movements before they got close. For decades, he ran a criminal network in plain sight, and his neighbors called him a pillar of the community. Ford was finally shot and killed in 1833, reportedly by men inside his own gang who believed he was about to inform on them. His son stepped into his role as leader. The old ferry site is a quiet stretch of Ohio River shoreline today. No buildings, no museum, no sign large enough to make most people slow down. Just the river and what it quietly witnessed for 30 years. Number 9. Paradise, Muhlenberg County. There is a place in Muhlenberg County that John Prine's grandfather called home, that Prine visited every summer as a boy, and that he turned into a song 50 years ago that still makes people stop what they're doing when it comes on. The town was called Paradise. It is gone. In Prine's own words, Paradise looked like a real Disney-looking town on the Green River. 2 general stores, a ferry landing, a church, long summer afternoons fishing for catfish. His grandfather Ham ran the ferry. Families had been there for generations. Then the coal companies moved in. Peabody Energy brought a 20-story strip mining machine and tore the surrounding land apart. Then in 1959, TVA built a massive coal-fired power plant right beside the town. Black soot and ash from the smokestacks began coating every surface in Paradise. Windows, gardens, rooftops, everything. By the mid-1960s, TVA had bought most of the remaining property. In 1967, the last residents were paid out and the buildings were bulldozed to expand the plant. In 1971, John Prine put the story on his debut album. John Denver covered it. Dwight Yoakam covered it. Sturgill Simpson covered it. The coal company was so furious they published a rebuttal pamphlet called Facts vs. Prine. The song kept selling. Today, the only thing left of Paradise is the McDougal Cemetery on a hill above the plant. Headstones standing in the shadow of the cooling towers. When Prine died in 2020, his ashes were scattered on the Green River, exactly as he'd asked in the song. A park near Rochester Dam was renamed in his honor. You can stand on that bank and look toward where Paradise used to be. If Kentucky's forgotten history matters to you, subscribe. We keep these stories alive. Number 8. Airdrie, Muhlenberg County. Deep in Muhlenberg County, rising from the woods along the Green River, there is a stone structure that looks like the ruin of a medieval castle. It is 55 feet tall, hand-built from Kentucky limestone, and it is one of the strangest failed experiments in the history of the state. It was supposed to be an iron furnace. In 1855, a Scottish nobleman named Robert Alexander purchased 17,000 acres along the Green River and shipped workers and craftsmen over from Airdrie, Scotland, to build his American iron empire. The furnace took shape. The town around it was incorporated and named for the workers' hometown. Everything was in place, except that Scottish miners knew Scottish ore. American ore, the kind found in Kentucky's Green River country, behaved completely differently at high heat. The furnace ran for a handful of trial burns and never produced iron worth selling. By 1857, barely 2 years after breaking ground, Alexander had walked away from everything. His Scottish family stayed and became coal miners in the same hills. Alexander moved to Woodford County, took up thoroughbred horse breeding, and became one of the most important figures in the history of Kentucky racing. A Civil War general named Don Carlos Buell later bought the property and tried drilling for oil. He found nothing either. The furnace stack and stone machinery house still stand in those woods, moss-covered, imposing, and almost completely unknown to people outside the county. John Prine referenced Airdrie in Paradise, calling it the abandoned old prison down by Airdrie Hill. Locals had long mistaken the furnace walls for a Civil War lockup. The legend was wrong, but it was believable enough that it made it into one of the most celebrated folk songs ever written about Kentucky. And now, it always will be. Number 7. Blue Heron, McCreary County. No road ever reached Blue Heron. The canyon walls of the Big South Fork of the Cumberland River were too steep, and the Stearns Coal and Lumber Company decided that was fine. They built their own railroad down the gorge instead. Mine 18 opened here in 1937, and a complete company town went up on the riverbank. The school took children through 8th grade, 20 or 30 kids of every age in one room, with no way out of the canyon except the company train. Miners and their families lived in a hollow so remote the outside world had little presence. You worked for Stearns. You lived in a Stearns house. You bought everything at the Stearns store with Stearns script. In December 1962, the coal ran out. The mine closed. Stearns stripped out what it could carry and left, and the buildings vanished faster than you'd expect, because they were designed that way from the start. Every structure in a Stearns camp was built to be disassembled and moved by rail to the next mine when the coal played out. Portability was always the plan. The forest reclaimed whatever didn't get loaded onto a flat car. The Park Service rebuilt Blue Heron in the 1980s, not with real buildings, but with open metal frames called ghost structures, set on the exact footprints of the originals. Walk through them, and you move through the outlines of houses, a school, a church. Each frame holds photographs and recordings of people who actually lived there, talking about their lives. It is the strangest memorial to a ghost town anywhere in America, a place rebuilt to show you precisely what was lost, using nothing but air, steel, and memory. Number 6. Stearns, McCreary County. In 1902, a Michigan lumber baron named Justice Stearns looked at a map of southeastern Kentucky and saw 130,000 acres of untouched old-growth forest, sitting above seams of coal in country so remote that no one had gotten there first. He bought it all, then he built a town to run it from. Stearns became the headquarters of the Stearns Coal and Lumber Company, at its height, an operation controlling 200 square miles of McCreary County. The company built the Kentucky and Tennessee Railroad to pull lumber and coal out of hollows and gorges too steep for any wagon. A network of company towns stretched along that rail line, with Blue Heron at the farthest and most isolated end. When Stearns shut down its mines in the 1950s and 1960s, the town emptied out the way every company town does when the company leaves, quickly and with little ceremony. Today, Stearns still exists, though just barely. Most of the original company buildings stand empty. The depot, though, still runs. The Big South Fork Scenic Railway departs from it on the same track Stearns built over a century ago, carrying passengers down through the same gorges that once moved an empire's worth of coal and timber. Ride it, and you ride the infrastructure of a world that is completely gone. The sealed mine entrances in the hillsides on either side are the only evidence it was ever real. Number 5. Barthel, McCreary County. Most ghost towns you visit and then you leave. Barthel is a ghost town where you can spend the night. Barthel was the first mining camp of the Stearns Coal and Lumber Company, established in 1902, the flagship operation, before the railroad pushed deeper into the gorges toward Blue Heron. At its peak, in 1909, Barthel packed 350 people into one narrow mountain hollow, and for a camp that no road could reach, it had a doctor on site, which tells you exactly how dangerous the work underground was. When the mine tipple burned in 1943, Stearns didn't rebuild it. The mine closed. Families left for camps with working mines. By 1961, the last original structures had rotted down or been dismantled. Then a man named Kogar bought the site in 1984 and made an unexpected decision. He spent $500,000 of his own dollars restoring the miners' cabins and making them livable. Today, Barthel Coal Camp rents those cabins by the night. The same square footage, same layouts, same coal country atmosphere that hundreds of families called home a century ago. People sleep where miners slept before dawn shifts. They cook in the same kitchens where breakfast was made before the walk to the tipple. What most visitors don't realize is that the miners who lived here were paid in Stearns-issued scrip, a company currency that could only be spent at the Stearns store. You couldn't save real money, you couldn't spend it anywhere else. Leaving meant walking away from everything you'd earned. Number 4. Gravel Switch, Marion County. The post office at Gravel Switch has been operating since 1851. It is, by most accounts, the smallest active post office in the United States, a room so narrow the postmaster has to turn sideways to reach the back shelves. And for over 170 years, it has kept sorting mail for a community that has been quietly becoming a ghost town around it. The railroad that once connected Gravel Switch to the larger world is long gone. The businesses that once justified a stop here have moved to bigger towns. The population has dropped far enough that census counts are sometimes difficult to complete. But the post office held. The people who remained gathered around it the way rural communities always do around whatever's still standing, not because it's practical exactly, but because it's still recognizably theirs. There's a grain elevator, a handful of occupied houses, a few families who grew up here and haven't left yet, and a post office smaller than most people's bathroom, open for business since the year Millard Fillmore was president. Number 3. Rosine, Ohio County. Most people who love bluegrass music have heard of Bill Monroe. Far fewer have ever heard of where he came from. Monroe was born and raised in Rosine, Ohio County, Kentucky, a small rural community in the western part of the state where fiddle tunes, banjo rhythms, and mountain harmonies were just the sound of ordinary life. He absorbed all of it, shaped it into something distinctly his own, and named it after the state he came from, bluegrass. Born in Rosine. Today, Rosine is barely a town. A few dozen residents, a gas station, a cemetery on the hill where Monroe is buried. Every September, musicians gather at the Jerusalem Ridge Amphitheater nearby for a festival in his memory, some of them traveling hundreds of miles to play in a hollow that the rest of the world mostly forgot about after Monroe left. Rosine didn't die dramatically. No flood, no fire, no government order. The railroad connection went away. The young people left for better opportunities. The economy that had sustained it moved somewhere else. The town faded the way towns always fade when there's no single moment to point to. What didn't fade was what Monroe built from what he heard here. His mandolin is in the Country Music Hall of Fame. His grave is under an old oak tree on that Rosine hillside, and the music he made from the sound of this disappearing place is still everywhere, even if almost nobody left here is paying attention to it. Number 2. The Mammoth Cave Towns, Edmonson County. Every year, more than 500,000 people visit Mammoth Cave National Park. They take the tour through 426 miles of underground passages and come out marveling at what the earth holds beneath southern Kentucky. Almost none of them know that the ground they walked in on used to belong to other people. Mammoth Cave became a national park in 1941. To build it, the federal government and a private association spent 15 years acquiring land from families who had farmed it since the early 1800s. Eminent domain proceedings were bitter and drawn out. What was paid bore little resemblance to what the land meant to the people losing it. The community of Proctor, along the Green River, inside what is now the park, was one of several that simply ceased to exist. Churches, schools, family farms, cleared. In many cases, the buildings were burned. The land went back to forest, with almost no public record of what had been there. What makes this even harder to sit with, the most detailed maps of Mammoth Cave itself were drawn from memory in the 1840s by an enslaved man named Stephen Bishop, who had explored more of those tunnels than anyone alive. His maps guided explorers for decades. He knew every passage underground and was never free to own a single acre of the land above it. Today, those trails you walk above the cave pass through what were once yards, fields, and orchards. The trees have erased almost all of it, but the cemetery at Proctor is still there, maintained inside the park boundary. If you hike to it, you can see the graves of the families displaced, so you could buy a ticket. The Park Service tends those graves. The descendants who come to visit are welcome. That is the arrangement. Come back and tend the graves. The land itself belongs to everyone now. Number 1. Camp Nelson, Jessamine County. 20 miles south of Lexington, on a limestone palisade above the Kentucky River, there is a place where more than 10,000 men walked to their freedom, and hundreds of their families died reaching for it. The Union Army established Camp Nelson in 1863 as a supply depot for campaigns into Tennessee. 3 sides of the site dropped away in sheer 400-foot river cliffs. Hundreds of buildings, tens of thousands of soldiers, a constant stream of supplies moving south. What changed Camp Nelson's history entirely was 1864, when the Army was finally authorized to recruit enslaved men as soldiers. Kentucky had not seceded, but it was still a slaveholding state, and the word traveling through it in 1864 was specific: reach Camp Nelson, take the oath, and you are free. The oath was the freedom, no waiting, no paperwork. The moment you swore it, you were emancipated. They came by the hundreds, then by the thousands. walking days through Confederate-held territory, across county lines, through fields and river crossings, to reach a limestone bluff on the Kentucky River. When they arrived and enlisted, they were free. More than 10,000 men trained here as United States colored troops, making Camp Nelson the third largest recruitment center for Black Union soldiers in the entire country. And they brought their families, wives, children, mothers, people who had walked away from everything alongside the men who had enlisted or who arrived alone seeking protection. They crowded into the camp with no legal status, no shelter assigned to them, nowhere safe to go back to. In November 1864, the camp's commander ordered them removed. 400 women and children were sent out of Camp Nelson under armed escort into the November cold. Most had traveled for days to get there. 102 of them died from exposure before they were allowed back inside. The missionaries stationed at Camp Nelson wrote it all down: names, ages, the temperatures, the deaths. Congress passed an act in March 1865 formally emancipating the families of USCT soldiers weeks before the war ended. When the camp closed after the war, the people who had nowhere else to go stayed and became the first community on that land. Most of the soldiers who came home returned to a Kentucky that still blocked black men from voting, that would take nearly another century to change in any meaningful way. Today, Camp Nelson is a national monument. The earthworks survive. The cemetery a mile down the road holds more than 800 graves of black soldiers who served. And in the missionary records, the names of 102 people who walked to freedom and were turned away at the gate are still there, written down in the cold. Most people in this country have never heard this story. It happened 20 miles from Lexington, Kentucky, and almost no one talks about it. Drop a comment. Where are you from? I'll add your town to the list for the next videos. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.